Crowds in Party. By Jodi Dean. Verso, 2016. Conclusion. For over 30 years, the party has been extracted from the aspirations and accomplishments it enabled. Even as dogma has been uniformly qualified with party, dispersed yet ubiquitous left dogmatism has turned the so-called obsolescence of the party form into the primary tenet of its catechism. Every other mode of political association may be revised, renewed, rethought, reimagined, except for the Communist Party. It's time to put this nursery tale aside and take up the challenge of actively constructing the political collectivity with the will and capacity to bring an egalitarian world into being. The party holds open the space for the emergence of such a will. It doesn't prefigure a new world, but impresses upon us the gap between the world we have and the world we desire. The innovation of Marxism was linking the political battle for socialism to workers' economic struggles. Social democratic parties sought to expand democratic rights and use parliamentary processes to win political power for the working class. But bourgeois, liberal, and parliamentary democracy stood in the way of working class power. As the political form of capitalist order, liberal democracy secures this order through principles and processes designed to individualize, disperse, and displace class antagonism. Encountering the incompatibility between capitalism and the people, revolutionary socialist and communist parties extended the political struggle beyond its electoral confines and pursued a wider range of tactics. Social democracy, nearly completely dismantled by neoliberalism and now confined to a certain fantasy of Sweden, proceeds by way of managing class antagonism. It denies the incompatibility of capitalism and the people as it finds ways to secure the compliance of the working class. In contrast, the promise of communism is the abolition of class and capitalism. The Communist Party pursues this abolition as a political struggle. For Marx, proletariat names capitalism's self-creation of what destroys it. This what that destroys capitalism is a collective subject, a force no longer dispersed in individual and local acts of smashing, sabotage, and disruption, but concentrated in solidarity. Of course, economic destruction alone is insufficient for the abolition of capitalism. The normal operation of the capitalist system is characterized by uncertainty and instability, a series of periods of moderate activity, prosperity, overproduction, crisis and stagnation. Contemporary capitalism has refined its capacity for wealth destruction. Over $34 trillion of market value was lost in the financial crisis of 2008. In the course of the recession that followed, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. The top 1% captured 121% of the income gains made between 2009 and 2011. Not only was the 1% better able to weather the crisis than the rest of us, but it was also able to increase its share. So it's not just economic destruction that's at stake. It's bringing to an end the capitalist cycle of creative destructive, the destruction of destruction. And this political destruction is brought to an end by the proletariat. It is not the task of the working class organized as workers. They are already organized as workers in the factory, which enables them to become conscious of their material conditions and the need to combine into unions. The abolition of capitalism depends on the organization of the proletariat as a party, a solidary political association that cuts across workplace, sector, region, and nation. The working class as a class is implicated in the success or stability of capitalism. Capitalism configures the working class's struggles with the bourgeoisie. In contrast, the party takes as its horizon capitalism's supersession in communism. For Marx, the party is necessary because class struggle is not simply economic struggle. It's political struggle. Consider the famous passage from the German ideology, "We call communism the real movement which abolishes the present state of affairs." How should we understand this? Not as immediate insurrection or as prefiguration but rather as the expansion of voluntary cooperation. I say this because Marx explains that the conditions of this movement, we call communism, result from premises now in existence. The premises he is discussing involve the multiplication of productive force through the cooperation of different individuals, as this cooperation is determined by the division of labor and not as an effect of people's own united power. Abolishing determination by the division of labor is a matter of self-conscious collective action wherein cooperation isn't forced, isn't out of our control, but is instead willed commonly. Cooperation and concentration become self-conscious and willed rather than unconscious and determined. Collective desire for collectivity becomes stronger than the individual preferences determined by capitalism. As the movement which abolishes the present state of affairs, communism expands collective voluntary cooperation, the power of many exerted back upon itself. As an organization premised on solidarity, the party holds open a political space for the production of a common political will, a will irreducible to the capitalist conditions in which the majority of people find themselves forced to sell their labor power. Where work is obligatory, membership in the party, like participation in the movement, is voluntary, the willed formation of united power. Among its members, the party replaces competition with solidarity. In a 2006 interview, Alain Badiou notes how, for Marx, proletariat is an identity that is a non-identity or an identity beyond all identities. In this sense, proletariat is generic rather than particular. Today, neither proletariat nor working class functions in the way that it did for Marx. Proletariat is less open to multiple particular contents. It doesn't feel generic. Political struggles fought along race and sexed axes of domination have made the liberation of the working class no longer appear as the liberation of humanity as such. Badiou concludes that the generic function of the working class is likely saturated. Moreover, he writes, we cannot substitute a mere collection of identities for the saturated generic identity of the working class. I think we have to find the political determination that integrates the identities, the principles of which are beyond identity. The great difficulty is to do that without something like the working class. In the course of working class political struggles in the 20th century, such a generic identity did already appear, the people. Georg Lukács credits Lenin's characterization of the Russian Revolution for transforming the idea of the people into a generic revolutionary identity. The vague and abstract concept of the people had to be rejected, but only so that a revolutionary, discriminating concept of the people, the revolutionary alliance of the oppressed, could develop from a concrete understanding of the conditions of proletarian revolution. Mao and Third World peoples struggles further this characterization of the generic subject of communism. The people thus has a powerful legacy as a name for that political subject which strives for emancipatory egalitarianism. Nevertheless, various ideologies speak in the people's name, constituting a subject in whose name it can speak his ideology's primary function. Like communism, populism and democracy, sometimes filling themselves in as nations or races, claim the people as their subject. Communism is therefore not unique in its claim of the people as its subject. Its uniqueness consists in its presentation of the people as a divided subject. In contrast with populist emphases on the imaginary unity of the people and democratic reductions of the people to the ways in which they are given, outcomes of elections and polls, categories of demographic identity, media expressions of public and audience, communism presumes that the people are split, bourgeoisie and proletariat, oppressors and oppressed, few and many. Rather than some kind of organic community, society arises around a fundamental antagonism. Class conflict is the Marxist name for this antagonism. Lenin's revolutionary, discriminating concept of the people asserts this division within the people. Communists recognize the people in and as that division. Instead of asserting unity, communists assert the gap. The party is a form for this assertion. As Badiou emphasizes, Marx's rendering of the proletariat as that generic group the liberation of which is a universal liberation is an extraordinary invention. Badiou notes that the history of this invention was not so much the history of the generic group, of the working class as such, but rather the history of the representation of this generic group in a political organization. It was the history of the party. The problem today is thus not only the inability of working class to name a generic identity. It is also and relatedly a collapse of confidence in the party as a political organization capable of representing this identity. The saturation of the generic political identity of the working class became manifest in the multiplication of political identities. From 1968's intoxication with the politics of the beautiful moment, through the 80s embrace of civil society and the politics of society's own self-targeting, into the activistism and movementism of the alter-globalization movement, the left has claimed as a victory the symptom of its defeat, the erosion of working-class political power and the accompanying decay of its political parties. Defeated on the political plane, the name of this defeat is neoliberalism. The left shifted to the social and cultural terrain. It fragmented into issues and identities. On some issues and with respect to some identities, there were political advances. At the same time, in jettisoning the struggle for political power, the left lost the capacity to defend and advance the interests of the people. Economic inequality increased. Commitment to social provisioning, education, public housing, welfare, social services, collapsed. Identity as an operator for a politics is now itself fully saturated. Symptoms of this saturation include the reduction of the space of change to the individual, the circulation of the momentary outrage in the effective networks of communicative capitalism, the practices of calling out and shaming that undermine solidarity, and the contradictory and destructive attachment to national and ethnic specificity. They include as well the complex mutual policing of who can claim what identity under what conditions and what authorizes such a claim. When identity is all that is left, hanging on to it makes a kind of sense. The reality of the struggle to survive becomes the basis of an identity imagined as dignified because it has to produce itself from itself. Attachment to identity is pathological, nevertheless. It enchains us to collective failure, turning us ever inward as it holds back the advance of a politics capable of abolishing the current system and producing another one. Unfettered capitalism and the repressive state constitute real limits to cultural critique and social experimentation, exploitation, dispossession, incapacitation, incarceration, proletarianization, extermination. Perhaps the most striking symptom of the saturation of identity is thus the economic rupturing of identity categories, that is to say, the emergence of identities as themselves sites of class struggle. In 2014 and 2015, riots in Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland pushed this struggle into mainstream discussions in the U.S. Since Badiou's 2006 interview, there has been renewed left interest in the party form. This interest results from the impasses encountered by the crowds and riots in the latter half of the decade. In cities all over the world, hundreds and thousands of people took to the streets and parks in a resounding no to the array of policies installed by the capitalist class to protect its interests. These protests signaled a new militancy and determination on behalf of opponents of austerity, precarity, state violence, and the neoliberal mantra of cuts, cuts, cuts. Then the protests ended. The crowds went home. Sometimes they made no demands. Other times they made impossible demands. And still other times they asserted truths both obvious and painful in the urgency of their assertion. Black Lives Matter. The press of these crowds presents an alternative to Badiou's identity that is beyond identity. The alternative is movement itself, the force of many where they don't belong, the intensity of the egalitarian discharge. Marx and Engels link socialism not simply to the identity of the working class. They link it to working class movement. In the 19th century, worker uprisings were pushing forward, coming together, and breaking out, disrupting capital processes of value extraction. This active movement incited Marx and Engels, and other 19th-century socialists and anarchists, to see in proletarian struggle more than demands for shorter working days, safer working conditions, and higher wages. They saw these struggles as the political process of the subject of communism. We can repeat their innovation not by looking for a generic identity, a search that already preoccupied Marcuse and returns in another form in Hartz and Negri's multitude, but by emphasizing movement. In place of the saturation of identity, we should turn to the process of movement, recognizing the people as the subject of that process. The very fact of the active aggregation of crowds, the rise of political opposition and militancy, directs us to a collective desire for collectivity. The crowds and riots of the last decade have shown us the many coming to sense their collective power, the capacity of number to inscribe a gap in the expected. Debt, immiseration, policing, and dispossession have incited those proletarianized under communicative capitalism to revolt. Global demonstrations have also brought to the fore the crowd's limitation. Its powers are destructive, creative, unpredictable, contagious, and temporary. The strength that comes with the indeterminacy of the crowd's message is a weakness when the crowd disperses. The crowd lacks capacities of endurance, implementation, and execution. Without mediation, that is to say, absent a transferential relation to another space, it doesn't know what it desires. The crowd doesn't have a politics. It is the opportunity for a politics. Some on the left like to repeat Trotsky's warning about substitutionism. The party substitutes itself for the class. The party organization substitutes itself for the party. The Central Committee substitutes itself for the party organization, and the leader substitutes him or herself for the Central Committee. They present horizontalism as an alternative that can avoid these problems. Over the past few decades, we've encountered the limits of horizontalism as it fails to scale, endure, or replace capitalist state power. Far from solving a problem of left political organization, horizontalism is the name of a problem. Substitutionism, though, is not. The GAP's substitutionism flags are the space of the subject. Neither the crowd nor the party is the people. The people is the gap between them. Political capacity always involves delegation, transfer, and division of labor. Not everyone can do everything. The very idea of a politics of everyone is a debilitating fantasy that denies the constitutive feature of the political. Division goes all the way down. The crowd enables us to build a theory of the Communist Party as a synthesis or movement party. Such a party is neither the movement's vanguard nor instrument. It is a form of organized political association that holds open the space from which the crowd can see itself, and be seen, as the people. The Communist Party is the party faithful to the crowd's egalitarian discharge. It doesn't represent the movements. It transfers their egalitarian intensity from the particular to the universal. The Communist Party finds the people in the crowd. Badiou treats the subject effect as a knot of four concepts: anxiety, courage, justice, and superego. Canetti renders the crowd as a knot of four elements: growth, direction, equality, and density. In the party, the two knots intertwine as concentration, endurance, fidelity, and transference. The party does not represent the people as a collective subject. The party responds to this subject. Hence, it concentrates the subject effects of anxiety, courage, justice, and superego into a transferential site from which they can work back on the collectivity. The party thus responds to the subject by recognizing it in the crowd and thereby making the crowd into something more than it is. It gives the crowd a history, letting its egalitarian moment endure in the subjective process of people's struggle. The party occupies the place of division opened up by the crowd. It mines the breach, maintaining it as the gap of desire of the people as a collective political subject. Without the perspective of the party, multiple resistances blur into the menu of choices offered up by capitalism, so many lifestyle opportunities available for individual diversion and satisfaction. The legacy of people's struggle and crowd event are then carried only by university, culture, and momentary organizations, subjected to the demands of capitalism and deactivated as living resource. The gap of desire is sublimated into the circuit of drive. Without the party, there is no body capable of remembering, learning, and responding. Instead, dispersed individuals, absorbed in communicative capitalism and buffeted by competition, offer multitudes of opinions, suggestions, strategies, and critiques, the collective capable of response present only as an absent addressee. Providing the perspective from which the people can be seen and the space of its desire maintained, the party enables the people to appear in the rupture of the crowd event. The need for the party stems from the fact that the people are split between the ways we are given, positioned, within capitalism. We are situated within a field that tells us who we are and what we can be, that establishes the matrix of our desire, Zizek's definition of ideology, but that represses the truth of this field and class struggle. Capitalism strives to separate and individuate us, to instill in us the conviction that self-interest matters above all else, that freedom results from individual choices made for individual goals. It blocks from view the systemic determination of choices and outcomes, not to mention the power of collectives in rupturing these systems. When leftists assume the individualism of the dominant ideology, reiterating its emphasis on uniqueness and trying to cultivate a politics out of individuated decisions, we undermine our own best impulses to collectivity and egalitarianism. The party asserts the truth of our division. It speaks from the position of this truth and offers another field of possibilities. In opposition to capitalist desire, it opens up a terrain for the desire of a collective political subject. The party doesn't know everything. It provides a form for the knowledge we gain through experience and analyze with our eyes on the communist horizon. Such a party works to extend the collective desire for collectivity after the crowds go home. When it enables the crowd to endure as a rupture with capitalism, rather than a continuation of or contribution to it, and when it directs the crowd feeling toward its own constitutive equality, the Communist Party can hold open the gap for the people as the collective subject of politics. At different points over the past 100 years, the party has attempted to abolish capitalism and usher in communism in various ways: revolutionary seizure of the state, participation in parliamentary processes, training of cadres and education of masses in order to be prepared when the time comes, support and development of people's cultures and capacities. The Communist Party has never been simply an organization aimed at achieving a set of economic reforms aimed at restraining capitalism's extremes and providing workers with welfare guarantees. That this is the case is clear when we note the justified sense of betrayal voiced by communists when their parties compromise and retreat. They feel betrayed because the party gave way on communist desire, the very desire its wide array of organizations hold open, the desire underpinning solidarity and comradeship. The array of classic party organizations, newspapers, literary magazines, clubs, trade associations, sports teams, schools, theater troupes, women's groups, industry-focused councils, to mention but a few, reminds us that communist parties have always exceeded the binary of state and factory, actively engaging on multiple social, cultural, and economic fronts as elements of one struggle. As a red thread throughout the movements of the oppressed, communists connected divergent issues and experiences, enlarging them into a common world and mobilizing the collective desire for collectivity. Unlike standard parliamentary parties claiming representative authority, the work of the Communist Party involves substantialization, concentration, extension, and transference. Hence communist values of comradeship, solidarity, enthusiasm, and courage support the building of a political organization capable of responding in a revolutionary situation and enduring in less propitious times. Through the party, members push each other into modes of being and acting that appeared impossible before, when they were alone against capital and its state. The problem the left encounters today is less a matter of organizational details than it is of solidary political will. As the will emerges, people will figure out the structure in light of the challenges we face in specific contexts, challenges such as expanding militant pressure in ways that inspire and educate cadres while at the same time straining the resources of the state and breaking the confidence of the financial sector, abolishing private property and the capitalist banking system while advancing international coordination in an uneven environment, and increasing popular support of and developing a program for common management of production, health, transportation, communication, food, housing, and education, all in the setting of a changing climate, to mention but a few. Responding to these variable challenges generates new knowledge that can be integrated and shared. There is no reason to assume that every component of the party must have the same structure. A global alliance of the radical left, or, better, a new party of communists, can be knit together from the concentrated forces of already existing groups, militants skilled at direct action, artists adept with symbols and slogans, parties experienced at organizing, issue groups knowledgeable about specific areas of concern, mutual aid networks addressing basic needs. Such a concentration would let people who want to be engaged in radical politics but aren't sure what to do have a place to go, a place to start. More importantly, such a concentration would amplify specific and local achievements as collective victories in the broader struggle for communism. At the most minimal level, if we are to have a chance of reformatting the basic conditions under which we live and work, we have to share a name in common as a fundamental marker of division. If not, our names will be given to us by capital, which will seek to fragment and distract us. In the movements of the last few years, we've seen growing recognition of the power and need for a name in common as a marker of division. We are all, Khalid said, occupy, we are Seneca Lake. A frustrating dimension of localized political work is the way that it seems not to register, particularly if it occurs outside of major metropolitan areas. When local and issue politics are connected via a common name, however, successes in one area advance the struggle as a whole. Separate actions become themselves plus all the others. They instill enthusiasm and inspire imitation. They provide a sense of directionality and movement. Which way is the struggle going? Simply multiplying fragmented, local actions isn't enough. They have to be felt as more than what any one of them can be in isolation, indications of the enduring struggle of the people. In addition to a common name, we have to build solidarity, to extend the bonds of commitment beyond local ties and small networks. Without solidarity, a common will cannot emerge. Immiseration, precarity, defeat, and betrayal as well as ongoing patterns of sexism, racism, and homophobia have made us deeply suspicious. One way a party helps deal with this is with explicit criteria for membership and expectations for members. It supplements personal relations with relations to an organization, holding members accountable to expectations. Relations between comrades overlay and replace particularized relations anchored in individual preference. Practices of regular reporting help install these expectations. Another way a party builds solidarity is by acknowledging different skills and expertise, providing training and education, and delegating tasks. Developing and respecting one another's skills and knowledge is essential if we are to form ourselves into a political force capable of taking on and replacing global capitalism. In practice, this suggests the utility of working groups in multiple locales and issue areas, groups with enough autonomy to be responsive and enough integration via practices of reporting to formulate and carry out a common purpose. It points as well to the active development of the organizational and political capacities crucial to multi-scale communist self-governance. Left anti-party dogma mobilizes anti-authoritarian convictions. Yet this mobilization has resulted in the intensified authoritarianism of global capitalism. Today authoritarianism is less that of centralized state power than it is of power decentralized, dispersed, and extended via private contracts, interbank and interagency cooperation, and the extensive network of treaties, agreements, and provisions enabling capital flow and global trade. National states act as the police force protecting the global capitalist class. We encounter the fragmentation, dissolution, and decomposition of some elements of the state, and the concentration and intermeshing of other elements of states and markets, as in finance, security, and media. Capital as a class has worked to smash the bureaucratic state machine for us, to convince us that it is useless, even as it strengthens parts of it for its own ends. For too long, left politics in the US, UK, and EU has mirrored neoliberal economics, urging decentralization, flexibility, and innovation. Even the neoliberal push to privatize is reflected in left politics. Not only do we hear ad infinitum that the personal is political, but the micro-politics of self-transformation and DIY takes the place of building and occupying institutions with duration. In this vein, some on the left have abandoned social change entirely. Wary of totalizing visions, they cede society and the state to a capitalist class that acts as a global political class intent on extending its reach into and strengthening its hold over our lives and futures. The crowd has pushed this left aside. Rising up in opposition to the decentralized authoritarianisms of interconnected states and markets, it has occupied, blockaded, and rioted. And it has come up against the limits of its capacity to give social struggles political form. The challenge we face is becoming the left the crowd deserves, a left that, faithful to the crowd's egalitarian discharge, works to make it endure. A left that speaks the language of radical change but refuses its forms is no left at all. It's the means by which political energy and conviction is displaced into styles and practices that make us feel good by making us feel radical. To advance, we need to organize. We need to be a party for the people in the crowd.